All righty. Thank you again, everyone, for taking the time out of your day to join us on this webinar, Creating Multi-Channel Fundraising and Cultivation Workflows in Virtuous. My name is Jeff Jacobs. I'm going to be emceeing today's webinar. I'm going to be joined by Scott Richards in just a little bit, where he's going to do a training and demo of how you can build multi-channel campaigns in Virtuous. But first, I wanted to quickly kind of go over our agenda. We're going to do a quick overview of the multi-channel communication study that Virtuous recently published, followed by a demonstration and training of multi-channel workflows in Virtuous, followed by some Q&A. So at any time, if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the Q&A. Just hit the Q&A button here in Zoom, drop in your question, and we'll make sure to answer those at the end of the presentation. So we're going to talk through multi-channel donor communications, like I had mentioned, and how it can impact retention rates, donor engagement, and lifetime value. The study that I mentioned that just a moment ago that we had published, we actually did that with our partner over at Next After. It's called The State of Multi-Channel Donor Communications. If you haven't already downloaded a copy, you can get a free copy at multichannelnonprofit.com. Go download it, share it with the rest of your team. We'll try and get that link in the chat here in Zoom in just a moment. To give you a little bit of an overview of how we conducted the study, we made donations to over 100 organizations and then kind of watched what happened, how they communicated with us, when, what channels. There was a lot of great findings in the study. We're going to touch on just a couple of those findings before the demo. But before I dive in, I do want to take a quick step back and look at some of the problems that nonprofits are facing with fundraising and cultivation. So a lot of times for a lot of nonprofits, this is kind of what fundraising looks like. And it looks like this for the last couple of decades. Donors come in, they come on file, they get into your database from a variety of sources. You know, maybe they came in from an event that they were invited to by a friend, or they received a direct mail piece from you and the story resonated, or a peer-to-peer campaign. All of these varied acquisition sources are different. All of these people have different understandings of your mission and what you do. But then everyone's kind of thrown into the same cultivation and communication flow after their acquisition. They receive your November appeal, and then your year-end campaign, and then maybe a couple of monthly appeals before a newsletter, and the same email strategy. And this kind of cultivation is leading to 76% attrition, and that's broadly across the industry what nonprofits are seeing, meaning out of 100 people that give to your organization, only 24 are ever going to give a second gift. And this is really leading to a generosity crisis, where nonprofits are seeing a 50% turnover in donors year after year, and then there's been a 25% decrease in mid and low tier donors over the last decade. And the reason for this, according to a study by Adrian Sargent, is largely inappropriate asks and impersonal communication. And that's why people are adopting what we call a responsive fundraising model. It's donor-centric. And it's a simple 4-step model that starts with listening to the donor. What do they care about? How did they get involved with your organization and your mission in the first place? How do they want to be communicated with and when? And then connecting with the donor in personal ways, speaking directly to them and what they care about. Then suggesting next steps for involvement. So whether that's giving or volunteering or becoming an advocate for your cause, all based on their capacity and preferences. And then, of course, testing, validating, rinsing, and repeating the process. So let's kind of reimagine what that communication flow could look like for a specific donor. So let's take a look at Lisa. She attended an event. Maybe she was brought by a friend, like I said, and within an hour of the event concluding, she receives an email thanking her for attending and a short 2 to 3 question survey asking her what she's passionate about. Then a day later, she receives a thank you call from the events team just to say thank you and ask if she has any questions. 2 days after that, she receives a text message from the program team based upon the survey that she completed. Lisa visits the website and then the next day receives an email with a donation ask based upon her capacity and directly supporting what she was reading about on the website. Lisa gives, and then after the donation, she receives a thank you postcard in the mail, closing the loop and communicating the impact her gift is going to have on your mission and the critical role that she plays. Now, this is a massive difference from what we looked at before, the traditional mass communication tactics that have often been the primary source of direct fundraising. And it's not hard to do with the right systems and processes in place. Virtuous has the tools that you need to do this kind of dynamic, personalized cultivation going out to all of your supporters. So what if Tim became a first-time donor and receives a new donor welcome series based upon the program that he gave to you? And what if Rhonda receives an online gift recovery sequence after visiting your donate page, but didn't donate? And what if Lynn received a pre-lapse sequence because she normally gives 2 to 3 times per year, but hasn't given in 7 months? And what if James receives a gift conversion sequence based upon the video he watched from your recent email campaign? What would this do for your donor retention or your donor engagement? So before I hand it over to Scott to demo some of these things, I wanted to take a quick look at some of the study's findings that I mentioned before. And the first one, it's a little bit obvious, and that's multi-channel donors. Those are the folks that write checks and donate online, have a lifetime value over 3x that of online only and offline only donors. So this is obvious, right? We all intuitively know this. Donors that are more engaged and connect to your organization are more likely to be channel agnostic and are retained at higher rates and give more. It's not rocket surgery, but it is important to an important reminder that there's a huge opportunity for growth sitting at our fingertips. But the reason I like this stat so much is because of the next finding from the study. And that's 97% of nonprofits aren't using multi-channel engagement strategies. Like, let that sink in for a minute. Multi-channel donors are worth 3 times as much, but 97% of nonprofits aren't using multi-channel. Like, it doesn't make sense. There are a lot of reasons that this could be, but to me, one of the reasons is that so many nonprofits are handcuffed to outdated software or just don't have the processes in place to do this. And it doesn't appear to be a problem with having the right data to connect with donors over multiple channels. There were several nonprofits that we donated to as part of this study that actually required a phone number. Even though that suppresses response rates on online donation forms, they required a phone number, but then never gave us a call. So there's a gap here in the data that's being collected and the data that's being used. So the last point that I want to bring up from the study was, this one can be a little bit of a mouthful, but cultivating offline only donors. So those are the people that only write checks. Cultivating these supporters via email, phone, and SMS increases giving by 89%. And I think the key word here is cultivation and not fundraising. It costs, if my video were on, you would see the air quotes. It costs basically nothing to send an email or a ringless voicemail just to say thank you for their support and the impact that they're having, or to send them a text message with a link to a video about the program that they updated or the program that they've supported. So these touch points, these key steps are there to make sure the donor feels needed and that you're grateful for their sacrificial support and that their continued confidence in their donations, that they're going to the right places and that their support is essential. And it can ensure that you receive future support. So all of these things are possible with the right strategy in place and with the right technology that Virtuous can offer. So I'm going to turn it over to Scott now for him to demo how you guys can build multi-channel campaigns in Virtuous with Virtuous automation and some of our marketing tools. So Scott.
Fantastic. All right. I'm going to take on the screen share here. So pardon us while we have a little housekeeping behind the scenes and switch over. A lot of the findings in this study, I think, are really eye-opening, and a couple of them really go together. I think what it all comes down to is challenging some of the conventional wisdom that says, well, whatever channel someone uses to give, that's their dedicated channel. So, for example, the idea of cultivating offline only donors online. So often you hear, well, if someone gives in response to a direct mail piece, we don't email them, we only send them mail. And if someone gives online in response to an email, we will only send them email. And really what this is saying is, don't make that choice for your donor. Let them make that choice. If they decide, they might say to you, hey, I really prefer SMS and text messages. I really prefer email. But until they do, don't assume that, and don't let them make that, don't make that choice for your donor up front, because that really cuts you off. And if you think back, a lot of us probably remember some horror stories over the last 5-10 years where someone's board looked at the cost to raise $1, for direct mail acquisition, and they looked at the cost to raise $1 for email, and they said, well, let's stop doing direct mail. Let's just do all email. And over time, that started to really impact acquisition numbers for a lot of those nonprofits, right? I've talked to a handful of them. Like I said, apocryphally, there's a lot of apocryphal stories out there. Everybody probably knows someone who has some experience with this. And in those cases, then, right, it became difficult for them to acquire new donors because they had cut off that entire channel. And it turned out that even the email giving numbers were being strongly influenced by direct mail and vice versa. There's a lot of cross-pollination between channels. So you don't want to cut that off at the knees, right? You want to make sure that you're able to reach out to people across every channel. And like Jeff said, those that tend to engage across multiple channels, they're going to be the ones that are most likely to give a higher amount, right? You're building a stronger connection with them. And again, if they say, don't text me, well, then it's incumbent on you not to text them. But until they do, don't make the choice. Okay, so now we want to flip around and look at how we can do some of this in Virtuous. It should be no surprise to a lot of you that as you see my screen here, I'm here on the automation screen. But I really wanted to focus on, how quickly you can get up and running with some of these. And so I wanted to start here with some of these best practice templates that we have baked into the system. And then we're going to make some modifications to these templates so that you can see we can even expand what we do. So you can start with a really great workflow, and then you can start to layer in additional channels and additional touch points, and even listen to additional signals to make that workflow even more responsive over time. Okay, so the first one we're going to look at is the one that is generally, the highest ROI workflow you can build, and that's a new donor welcome series right down in here. So we're going to create a new workflow. We're going to create this new donor welcome series. Let's call this the webinar donor welcome so that I know which one it is later. And Jeff mentioned that 76% number, right? The struggle to retain donors. And so a big part of being able to retain new donors is having some dedicated communication to welcome them to your organization, to thank them for what they've done, and also to communicate to them the impact of their gift, right? Number one reason that donors don't give again, they weren't thanked. But the other part of that is they want to know that their gift had an impact. And the more you can communicate that to them, the better off you're going to be. And so here we've got our donor welcome series. All I did was give this thing a name, and there you go. It's all built out for us, right? And so here we're tagging anybody who comes in as a first-time donor. And we're adding a tag to indicate that they're part of our new donor welcome series right now. And then they're going to get some email communication to say thank you. We're going to create a task for me to give them a call and say thank you. So like Jeff said, if we're collecting that phone number information, if we're asking for it, we should probably use it. And especially if we have an online gift or a check gift, we're going to have an address. So we're going to send them that new donor welcome postcard. So they're going to get a nice, actual personal, physical touch from us in the mail. They're going to get a phone call and they're going to get an email right away. And then we're going to continue this series because, again, we don't want it to just be we said thank you once and we went away. We want to make sure that they understand that we're now building a relationship with them as a new donor. Now, let's say that I wanted to modify this because I wanted to communicate with these donors through an additional channel, especially if you have someone who is a little bit younger or hipper or whatever, they might want to get SMS messaging. And like I said, that's a donor preference. For example, if I donate to you, you can text me. I'm kind of fine with it, but that's just okay. If my wife donates to you, she's going to love to get text messages. She gets text messages from every single service that she's part of, and that's kind of how she rolls. She manages her whole life from her phone. So that's great. Maybe I want to add that kind of touch point in here. Now, I could create a task that says, hey, send a text message if I wanted to do that manually or something like that. That's really something I want to do for major donor cultivation, right? If I'm going to establish that personal connection. But we've got the ability to add SMS as a workflow action. So I can come down here and I can say, I'm going to add in SMS. I can select the template that I want to use. So I have to have created my message template already. You can do that in the SMS section. But this will be my new donor welcome message. I can choose who on these records I'm targeting. This is going to a contact record. So we'll just contact the individual, the primary individual on the record. I can choose a particular time of day to send it. I kind of like 9 a.m. We're jumping on this right away. And then I can save that action. Now that's down at the bottom here, but I want this to happen a little bit earlier on in the process. So I can come up here and I can add that right to the top. Now it looks like we've got a lot of things happening on the same day, but when we unpack this, this means someone's going to get an email on that day. They're going to get a text message from us that day. This new donor call is going to happen somewhere in that 3-day window, not necessarily on the same day. And if we're sending that postcard out, that's going to take a few days before it arrives, right? Could be about 3 days, 4 days before they get that in their mailbox. So even though we're triggering all these things right away, there's going to be a little bit of a breakup there in terms of that communication. Now, this is great. Okay, we've gone another level here with a new donor welcome series. We're communicating across multiple channels. And again, as this all goes out, someone might say to us, please don't text me. Great, then I know not to use that next time. I might give them a call and they tell me how they prefer to be contacted, right? They're going to get something in the mail. They're going to get all these touch points. At least one of them is going to hit home. Now, if I wanted to be even more responsive, Jeff talked about the responsive fundraising framework, right? I listen for donor signals, then I connect with them, right? I suggest the right next step to someone, and then I repeat, right? That's the cycle that I want to do over and over again. Here, we're doing that. We're listening for a donor signal because giving is a donor signal, right? And then beyond that, I could look at, well, how much did they give? What project is someone giving to, right? What campaign or what channel are they responding to? All of those are donor signals. But another donor signal is something you can add right into a workflow. And that is, if I'm using donor search, I could add in wealth data, right? That's another one I could add in here. So I could say, hey, I'm going to add in a wealth append automatically anytime someone is a new donor, right? I want to say thank you to them. And I just want to check out, see how they look as a donor. What does their wealth look like overall? Because maybe they came in giving me $20 online, but it turns out they could give a lot more than that. They don't know me well enough yet. And I don't know them well enough yet. But I mean, I want to, I probably should get to know them pretty well. Now, once I do this, then I can add in the idea of branching out and having a different experience for donors that have a higher wealth data, right? Those that have a high rating. I want to send them an email right away. I want to have a touch point with them right away, but maybe there's a few other things that I want to push back here, right? So maybe I'm going to do that wealth append on day 1. I'll save the SMS maybe for day 2 here. And then I can come up here and add a step. And for this step, this could be my new donor, and they are major gift prospects. I'll probably capitalize this a little bit better. There we go. Now, up until now, creating workflows, well, not now, but recently in any event, creating workflows meant I had to go wrangle with queries. I had to create queries and save them and build them in, but now I can do this a lot faster right from here. So I can come in here and I can say, hey, I want to do this for new donors who are major gift prospects. I know that in my first step, I'm tagging these folks with first-time donors. So I want to look for anybody who's tagged as first-time donor. And I want them to have a donor rating that starts with a DS1. DS1 is pretty good rating from donor search there. So I could build that filter right in here. I don't have to monkey with queries. I don't have to do anything too crazy to do that. I can save this step. I was going to throw it right over here, but I can grab these little grab handles. I can do-si-do these bad boys around. I can stick this right over here. And now I can create a new path for anybody where we've appended wealth data and they have a higher wealth rating because they look like they're potentially a major gift prospect. So I want to send them some communication, but it's slightly different. Again, I'm listening for the donor signal. Donor signal 1, they gave me some money. They have some affinity for us and they want to donate. Signal number 2, they actually have a lot more wealth than that gift implies. So I want to connect with them a little bit differently because my next step to suggest a gift is going to be very different for that donor. I don't want to suggest that they maybe give me $25. I don't want to suggest a recurring donation amount of $10 a month. I want to, it's going to take a longer time. I'm going to have to cultivate that relationship a lot more differently. But I want to suggest a major gift for that particular donor. And then from here, I can begin to add actions. And this is where I do the cooking show trick, where I start to put all these ingredients in a bowl and I've got 6 raw eggs and a pile of flour. And I reach under the counter and I pull out a finished cake. Because over here in this other tab, I already did this. Okay, I already built this out. And so this is the same workflow. I started from the same thing, the same new donor series. And the only thing we did here is we added in this other step, looking for major donor prospects. And so there I'm adding an additional tag to mark them as a major donor prospect. I'm giving them a new major gift prospect call. So there's a little bit of a different sort of script, a little bit of a different focus there. I'm following them as well because I want to see what they do next, right? And I've got my prospect manager who is Fozzie Bear, who, by the way, is really good at analyzing data. He's going to review all the data for this donor and qualify them and make sure that they really do need to be cultivated as a major donor, right? He's going to dig in a little bit further, just make sure before we throw all our resources at them. And we're going to delay for about 5 days, let all this happen here. Let me give them a call. Then I'm going to text them, or then we're going to send them a text, right? Major gift prospect outreach. Thanks so much. They're going to get a welcome letter, right? So suppose just that little postcard, hey, we're going all out. We're sending them a full letter and it's a fancy looking mailer here they're going to get. And again, this is using our letters on demand service. So that's happening automatically. That's just, I don't touch anything. I don't print anything. It just shows up at their house. If I wanted to do this without that, I'd have to create a task for each one. Then I'll go in, complete the task. I'll go print the letter. I'll merge in the donor's information and I could put it in the mail and send it, right? I can do this a lot of different ways. We just have technology to make it a little bit easier to do this, because ultimately I want this stuff to be happening on its own while I'm actually making these calls and while I'm doing all these other things, right? And then we've still got an email sequence for them, a little bit different content for them. And at the end, we'll take off that new donor welcome series tag. Now I'm doing the same thing in step 1, because this way, with this tag, I can exclude anybody with that tag from any of my other appeals or other communication. I want there to be a very focused conversation for just these new donors. Okay. So that's one way that you can expand this. Now, as you grow, or as you start to get comfortable with the idea of automation, you can layer in additional concepts. Okay. And I saw a question come in about adjusting the welcome series based on the program someone is giving to. You can do the same thing, just like we did here, where we said, look, there's a slightly different stream here based on the fact that they're a major donor. If I've got a couple of key program areas, it could be projects, putting this in the Virtuous context. It could be project types or parent projects. If I'm talking about a grouping of projects, right? I might have a whole group of projects that qualify as my hunger relief projects. And underneath of that, there's a school lunch program. There's, a nutritional education program. There's a urban farming program. There's a whole bunch that are just under that umbrella. Well, I could also query for everybody whose first gift was to a project of that type or to one of those projects, either way. And I could have a separate stream for them. And it might be that they're getting a lot of the same touch points, a lot of similar content, but the emails are focused specifically on the project they gave to. That's where I start to go back to communicating the impact of their gift. That takes this up another level. Because again, not only am I saying thank you, not only am I communicating with them across multiple channels, but I'm also letting them know that their gift made a difference, and I'm communicating to them about something that I know they're passionate about. Because again, the project they gave to is another donor signal that I want to make sure that I'm listening for. Okay, so I can absolutely add that in. Now, in order to do that, practically speaking, that's where I wouldn't be able to do what we did here, right? Where we just did the quick filter here and toss this in. That would require building a query, because I need to use a gift query to identify the project or the group of projects that someone gave to. Okay. So if I'm adding that step, and I know I'm answering a live question in the middle here because I'm multitasking. Sorry about that, everybody. But if I wanted to build that gift query, I can come in and I can build that gift query. And over here, now, by the way, anytime I build queries, the easiest thing to do, just type a word. It's easier than scrolling through and searching for all the values in here. But I have project type. So I could say, hey, project type is, let's see. I don't always remember what types I have in this particular database anymore. So scholarships, great. So this could be scholarship gifts. Now, if I want to narrow this down, I'm looking for recent gifts to scholarship or something along those lines. I can certainly add a date boundary on here. I could say, and the gift date was after 30 days ago. Okay, now we'll call this recent scholarship gifts. And then I'm going to need a contact query. We're doing a contact workflow, so I could then build a contact query, and I could say, give me all of the contacts who are in my recent scholarship gifts query. Beyond this, I can add some of the same parameters that we looked at before. I want them to be tagged as a first-time donor. So tag is any of first-time donor, right? And I can do the same thing now. So I can say, hey, great, you're a first-time donor and you gave to the scholarship type project. Fantastic. Let's talk to you all about that and what a difference it makes. Okay. All right. Now, this is just one example of how you can do this in terms of a workflow. Jeff mentioned earlier on, we're talking really about fundraising and cultivation. That's really a key part of this too. It's not just, hey, I'm sending you some communication to say thank you and then ask you for your next gift. But I want to make sure that I'm using these tools to help cultivate relationships, because quite honestly, that's the part that falls by the wayside. especially when your team feels stretched thin, right? When you feel like you're trying to do a lot with a little, you say, thank you for the gifts that came in, but you're not always just checking in and say, hey, you're awesome. And we appreciate you. And we're so glad that you're part of our family. And there's a few different things that you can do to celebrate things like that, like milestones. And so if we go back in here and we look at some of these other best practice templates, there's a few workflows in here that celebrate some different milestones. Okay, we've got volunteer milestones. This is a great one. I actually really like this one. Whoops. I can type, I promise. There we go. But I'm really a big fan of this one because, again, we tend to focus so much on giving it as the key signal and on giving statistics, right? How much has someone given life to date or year to date? What's someone's last gift amount or their largest gift amount? But hey, you know, when they volunteer, they're still donating. They're just donating their time and their expertise, right? They're not giving us their treasure, but they are giving us their time and talent, if we're going to go with that analogy. So I want to make sure that I celebrate those milestones with as much fanfare and hoopla as I do when I say, hey, look, you've given $50,000 life to date. How amazing are you? And so that's why I'm a big fan of this particular workflow. And this one here, you notice, also uses a couple of different channels to celebrate these milestones. So at 20 hours, hey, you're going to get an email that says, you know, you spent a whole total of 20 hours working for us. That's amazing. You've given us that much time. At 50 hours, right, they're going to get this email from the organization. They're going to get a postcard in the mail. And there's a task for me to send them a more personalized thank you. Right. So they're getting sort of our fancy, glossy looking email. But then what goes a really long way is to have a human being reach out and send them a personal email from my personal email account and say, hey, I know we sent you a couple things, but look, you really are great. Thank you so much. Right. And when I create a task like this, I can have a personalized email template associated with that task. Remember, those personalized email templates, those are something that you can create. And when I use that personalized email template, it just opens my email account, my Gmail, and it pops in that message. I can then modify it, make it a little bit more personal, and I can send it off. But at least it gives me some rails to run on. So I don't have to stare at a blank white screen and wonder, what am I going to say to this person? Great, I got a starting point right here. Right? And then same thing when I get to 100 hours up here, hey, they're getting a thank you call and they're getting a full-on letter to say thank you. Right. And at all of these points, you'll also notice we're logging contact notes so that we can keep track of the date when someone hit these particular milestones, and we can look back and we can report on those later. So we're using a lot of different channels in here. And again, if I wanted to add in at the 20-hour mark, hey, the email's cool, I'd like to text them as well and just say a quick thank you, because again, they're volunteering all around town and they're always on their phone. I could do the same thing with my SMS and I could send them a text message there. And one of the other best practice workflows that I'm really a fan of for the same reason is the birthday celebration. I mean, this one is kind of, you know, when it's my birthday, I get an email from the car dealership where I got my last car. I get an email from my dentist's office. I get an email from a couple businesses I don't really care about. If there's one organization I'm passionate about, it's going to be one of the nonprofits that I work with and that I support. I want to hear from them. Right? So that's a really great opportunity to connect with people. So if we create that, and again, I'm just going to click create workflow. I don't have to do anything crazier than that to build this out. Then you're going to see this is actually split into two different steps. Now, some of you may have tried to create this particular best practice workflow. And if you don't have the letters on demand functionality, for example, you probably got a scary looking message that said that there were things included that are not in your contract and you wouldn't be able to see them in the workflow. So some of you may have been poking around and this might be the first time you've really seen this. This is what this actually looks like. The idea is that we're sending someone a postcard a week before their birthday. Okay. So their birthday is 1 week from now. So 1 week ahead of their birthday, we're going to drop a simple postcard in the mail. It just says, hey, happy birthday. You rock. You're great. Not happy birthday. And would you please create a peer-to-peer fundraiser on Facebook and ask it, you know, I can do that too. But really, if I want to cultivate that relationship, I want to say, happy birthday. You matter to us. Hopefully, I've already done the work leading up where I've built a strong enough relationship that they will want to create their birthday fundraiser for us. And hey, it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world if this postcard reminded them that maybe they want to do a birthday fundraiser for us, right? But I need to make sure if I want to cultivate relationships that not every touch point is transactional. I want to make sure that I'm saying, hey, we're in this together. We're partnering to end world hunger. We're partnering to make sure kids have access to clean water. Isn't this amazing? And then on someone's actual birthday, they can get an email. And again, if I also want to send them a quick text message that says happy birthday, someone like my wife, that would be ideal. She would love that. I can come in here and add an additional action, right? All of these best practice workflows are starting points. And then I could come in and I can add an SMS. And again, if I really needed to, sure, I could add a task instead and say, hey, I'm going to add a task. Someone text this person, but sure would be a heck of a lot easier to have it happen as part of the workflow itself. Now, I think everybody who's been on any other training webinar with me knows I could go on and on here. I have one more example I just want to highlight quickly, and I know we're getting some questions coming in, and I want to make sure we have time to address all of those. But the only other workflow I wanted to look at is one that I don't think we think about as often. New donor comes up again all the time. Happy birthday, that's something that makes sense, right? Celebrating milestones, things like that. But even before someone becomes a donor, if they subscribe to my newsletter, right? Hey, I'm going to call this newsletter. I want to make sure that I'm communicating with them right off the bat. I want to make sure that I'm saying, hey, welcome aboard. So glad to have you. We want to tell you more about who we are and how you can get involved and the kind of work we could do together if only we were working together on this, right? It is a partnership. It's not, hey, could you give us some money and then we're going to go do cool stuff. It's, hey, you bring the money, we bring the expertise, and together, Wonder Twin powers, activate. We're going to go ahead and we're going to make the world a better place. And so this is aimed at new subscribers. Now, this goes back to the idea that Jeff brought up of cultivating offline donors online, right? And vice versa, cross-pollination. Here, I've got someone who has subscribed to my emails. I'm going to send them some welcome emails. I have a task to give them a thank you call. So I'm communicating with them a couple different ways. And we're even going to send them a letter in the mail, right? Now, that means that I've got a survey linked in my first two welcome emails. Say, hey, we'd like to know more about you. Tell us about you. And one of the things I'm looking for is I'm going to ask them their address. So that way I can send them that welcome letter. But again, just because they subscribe to my email newsletter, I'm not making the decision that they're only interested in email. I'm going to communicate with them across multiple channels until they let me know otherwise. Because the more that I can engage them on those other channels and the stronger the relationship I can cultivate with them, the higher their lifetime value. That's what the study really shows, right? That's what this study really comes down to. Okay. I'm looking at the time. I want to make sure that I'm conscious of it. And I know, Jeff, it looks like you've also been trying to get back to some questions as we've been going through. Is that right?
Yeah, we have. We do have a couple of open questions that I think would be kind of good to answer live here for the entire audience. And one of them here is from Erica, wanting to know more about letters on demand. So with letters and postcards, how does that work? How do you get that in Virtuous? And then second, what does it do?
Sure. It's a great service. It's powered by elves. Not really. So letters on demand is kind of exactly what it says. It's being able to send letters or anything, a postcard on demand, right? And so when we think of mail, we tend to think in terms of bulk. Okay, so for example, I know I've talked to organizations who say, look, once a month, I run a query for everybody who gave their first gift in that month. And then I export that query and I go do a mail merge in Microsoft Word. And then I print the letters and I print the envelopes and I put the whole thing together and I do a bulk mailing once a month. Now, there's a lot of things to unpack there, right? Because number one, we talk about responsive and being a responsive nonprofit. Part of that involves speed. I want to respond right away, right? The thing with automation is I don't wait 3 weeks to say thanks for your gift. I say thank you right away. I want to jump on that. I want to let you know I'm paying attention, I'm listening, and that you've made a difference immediatamente. And so just that lag of time is one thing. And then there's all the time involved. And I don't think we always really think about staff time as being an expense, but there's the staff time involved in putting together that merge, putting together everything in those envelopes, getting it to the post office and getting it sorted and sent out and everything else. And so letters on demand is an add-on service, right? You can add that to your contract. Easiest way to do that, you can reach out to your account manager at Virtuous. If you don't know who your account manager is, or you just can't remember, we have you covered. You can always just reach out to the support team, right? You guys have seen the little support widget in the bottom right when you're logged into Virtuous. I have mine hidden right now. But you could come in and you could send us a message, and you can even say, hey, I want to ask a question about my contract. I want to know more about this. They'd be happy to talk to you about that service. But once that's activated, I've got my letters on demand up here. You can come in and create different letter templates. You can create different postcard templates. So for example, this is the postcard here for saying happy birthday to somebody. You'll come in and design that and build it out. Happy birthday, first name person, right? You can put in a little note here to say thank you to them. You'll be able to see what that's going to look like. Oh yeah. So it happens when I mess with things, right? You'll be able to see what that looks like when it actually gets printed up, when it's got all the postal marking on it and everything else. It's ready to go in the mail. And you can do the same thing with letters. So there's my postcard. That's what it's going to look like. Okay. And then I can publish it and I can use that in my workflows. And I can do the same thing with letters. So if I went in to create a letter, I can say, this is my webinar letter. And I can choose, do I want to include a reply device? If I say that, I can then pick what page number am I going to put the reply device on. And that page will actually be perforated for the tear off at the bottom of the page. I can associate a segment code with this if I wanted to. And we've got some templates to get you started here. And then you can modify that template as you want to here in the editor. And there's my tear off at the bottom. And same thing, I can come in and I can get a preview of this, right? And then I can go ahead and publish it and use it in automation. And once this is used in an automated workflow, I no longer am printing anything. There's what it looks like right there. I'm no longer printing anything. I'm no longer shoving things into envelopes. I'm no longer taking them to the post office. All of that happens automatically behind the scenes. And that will just end up in your donor's mailbox. So it's a great way to give them that personal, tangible touch. It's a great way to reach them on another channel, right? Again, the more channels, the better. The more messages you're sending to them, the better chance that one of them is really going to land and have an impact. And to do it without adding a lot of additional time and cost for your team. So that's the idea with the letters on demand.
Yeah, thanks. And I really like what you said earlier about how time is a big component here. Think of how you would feel if you gave $50 to an organization for the first time and you didn't hear back or didn't hear thank you for 30 or 45 days. You'd start to wonder, did they really appreciate that? And so time is such a big component, the timeliness and the fast response and getting back to people right away. We had another question come in on some of the pre-built workflows. So if somebody were to kind of start using automation and use one of those pre-built workflows, where do you begin? Where can you have the most impact with some of the workflows that we already have set up for folks?
Sure. Well, like I said earlier, the number one workflow, the highest ROI, the highest impact is going to be that new donor welcome series, right? Because like Jeff identified it in his slides earlier, that's a huge pain point sector-wide, right? Is retention of those one-time donors. There's a lot of factors that go into that number. But that's really going to be, one of the things that you want to combat is, hey, I want to retain those donors once they go on to at least give a second gift. Man, the lifetime value goes way up, right? The retention numbers increase. I just need them to do it again. And so the experience for that new donor is critical. And I'm not trying to say that following up with event attendees is not important. I'm not trying to say that saying happy birthday to people is not important. I said I kind of like that one. But really, if you're going to look to say, I want to do one of these things and I want it to be the one that moves the needle the most, that new donor welcome series is easily going to be the place that I would start.
Yeah, and I like the idea of starting simple and going from there. The idea of crawl, walk, run. So start simple. See where you need to make improvements, and that very well could be a new donor welcome series. You may use the pre-built workflow that's already set up, and you got to just adjust a couple of the emails, adjust a couple of the letters to have your branding and your message, and off you go. Or you may decide to keep it even simpler. Just a 3-touch sequence or a 5-touch sequence out over a course of a couple of weeks. Start simple, learn from it, and build on it from there. We also had a question, Scott, come through about the wealth appends. What is that? Where do you get it? What does it include? How do you use that data? Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Oh man, I'm going to exercise old muscles now. I used to work in the wealth append world once upon a time. So we partner. So number one, right? There's a lot of different places, a lot of different ways to get wealth data. We in particular have partnered with Donor Search in terms of embedding wealth data into Virtuous. And so let's see, trying to get my good friend here, Harry McSample, up. Glad to know someone has renamed them for me. That's good. Oh no, that was me. Look at that. But that's where we get the wealth data here. So you can see it's even labeled as powered by Donor Search. And so the idea with any of these wealth append services is that I'm going out and I'm looking for public record information about my donor. So it's not, hiring a private eye to go through their garbage. It's looking at public record data like what is the value of their home, or how many homes do they own? Are they an insider? Do they have inside stock with a publicly traded company? And if so, what's the value of that? What's the value of that company? What's the value of that stock, right? And one of the critical things that Donor Search does to kind of differentiate them from all these different kind of vendors out there is they really put an emphasis on giving history and giving activity, right? Sometimes you're just looking purely at wealth data. Hey, do they own a partial timeshare on a jet? And if so, what's that worth? Because then you probably have a lot of money. But we could all sit here and identify people like Bill Gates and Warren Buffett and everybody else who have lots of money. Having lots of money is not the only prerequisite, right? I need to know that you have an affinity for me, and I want to know that you have an affinity for my cause, and I want to know that you're charitable in general. So the nice thing about Donor Search is they do put some weight behind that. And so I can go out and do a live search. Here, I've already done one. I could refresh that search on this particular couple. And when I go to view all wealth data, I'm going to see a lot more detail in here. I'm going to see things like some scoring on their likelihood to give an annual fund gift or to give a major gift, to respond to a planned gift campaign. And I'll see their wealth data, their total charitable giving, the average home value for their zip code. And I'll even see a breakdown of their giving in the nonprofit sector. What types of organizations do they tend to support? How many gifts have they made that we know about, and how many? So that I can really get a sense of, hey, not only do they have a lot of money, because again, a lot of money, handy, but not the be all end all, but also, are they someone that looks like a good prospect for my organization? And if so, great. Then I want to approach them and I want to start to cultivate a better relationship with them. And to be honest, the nice thing with wealth data and the nice thing with having this, so we built this into this workflow here, right? The thing you want is the person who has given, $25, but could be giving you $25,000, because that's an area of opportunity. right? I mean, it's great to know if you look at wealth data that someone is really wealthy and they're giving a lot of money. Like that's good. But the great thing is they've already given. So I've got some built-in or assumed affinity here. And now I can see, hey, they do have an affinity for other orgs like us, and they've got the potential to give a lot more. I definitely want to make sure that I'm cultivating a stronger relationship with them. So that's the idea with the wealth data. And I can do the manual search like we just saw, but I can also embed that in a workflow to have that wealth data refreshed automatically. I can even configure donor search to automatically add wealth data as new contacts are created in the database. So that way I've got that scoring for everybody. And once I add those scores, so everything that we just looked at, okay, that we saw in that wealth data section, all of those fields are available in here for me to use in my query. Okay, so we saw like a breakdown of giving to grant-making orgs. I can pull in grant-making orgs gift count into here. I can pull in the higher education giving or gift count into my query, so I can use that to be able to power additional workflows or additional steps.
Perfect. We've got a couple other questions on some of the workflows. So we touched briefly on the new subscriber workflow. Well, what happens if the people that are new subscribers are actually already donors? How do you handle that?
Panic. So this is where you go back to that idea of being responsive, and you go back to that. I mean, I hate to sound like, drinking the Kool-Aid, but it really does go back to that framework, right? So I want to make sure I'm listening to those donor signals. I want to make sure I'm responding and connecting with someone in the correct way. And so my messaging to someone who is a new subscriber and is new to the organization is going to be very different than my messaging to someone who is a new subscriber but is already a donor. And I can choose a couple of things as I build out that workflow. Okay, number one, I can choose to filter out anybody who is a donor. Let's use the search trick. It's a lot faster and slicker. Look at that. That's so cool. But when I build out my criteria here, right? So this just says, hey, I want someone who's on an email list, they've got an email address, and they've never given a gift. This particular new subscriber series is aimed at a brand new name, and they're not a donor. If I want to add an additional path, just like we did in the new donor, an additional path for someone who's already a donor but who has subscribed to say thank you, I can do that too. And that'll start with a form confirmation email, right? When they fill out that lead form and they say, hey, I want to get your newsletter, I can configure that form to have a form confirmation email that goes out right away and says, thanks so much. And if I want to add additional content and an additional stream of communication to them, I would add an additional step here. I would modify my criteria in that case to say, hey, this is going to anybody who, again, they're on an email list, they've got an email address, and they've given before, right? They're a new subscriber. I want to hit them with a slightly different stream of messaging to say, hey, thanks for taking that next step and engaging with our content.
Excellent. Going back to wealth data, we did have kind of a specific question on the wealth overlays. And I think this is going to wrap up the questions unless others come through. But the question was about charitable giving, and how does that become part of public record, or is that something that you're familiar with, Scott?
A little bit. So in terms of looking at charitable giving in public records, a lot of that comes from published donor lists and published annual reports. And Donor Search has a team that is constantly out harvesting that data that's put out there on published donor lists, especially with, they might have a range. Here's everybody in our $5,000 to $10,000 club. Me, I have a background in theater. And when you go to the theater, first thing I used to do, because I'm theater and nonprofit combined, right? I open the program and I go to that donor listing in the back. Here's our angels, our patrons, or this or that. All of those public record lists are actually harvested They're matched up with data that's in Donor Search's database, so that they can create this huge database of charitable donation records. At the end of the day, there's always going to be charitable donation data that you can't see. There's always going to be charitable donation data that you can't find in public records, right? That's going to be the case no matter what. But they've actually done a pretty good job of doing that and of matching that data to the records in their system.
Excellent. All right, we did have one last question. I think we'll have time for it if we go quick here, but it kind of centers around donors that give to multiple projects. So let's say I send a gift in for $100 and I want 50 to go to education and 50 to go to healthcare. How do you set up your automation, and how would you recommend, Scott, that we close the loop with donors on the specific things that they're supporting? Do you send them 2 sequences, or is it just one?
So this is where the structure of workflows is kind of on your side, but it does mean that you're going to have to make some decisions about how you structure your workflow, right? Because if I'm going to build those queries, so a couple things. Grouping projects by type and being able to create those groupings, that's one easy way to be able to say, hey, you split your gift 3 ways, but all of those splits really roll up under the umbrella of education, of access to clean water, of these larger groupings that we've created. Those groupings can be parent projects, they can be project types, they can be project locations, right? However you want to categorize those projects, whatever taxonomy you're going to create. That's one way to do this. I know we have some clients that do that already. And so they're not responding to each individual project on a donation, but they're responding to the larger umbrellas there. Now, that's one thing you can do. But the other thing, so if I'm building all of this in a single workflow and I'm going to have queries to identify those different gifts, a contact can only be in one workflow step at a time. And we're actually taking advantage of that right here in this particular example. We run queries in order from right to left to enroll people. And so the way that someone who has a higher wealth rating stops getting all this content over here in column 1, and they start getting all the new major donor prospect content, is because they're going to match to that query first, and that's going to be their dedicated path. And so if I create a workflow that has multiple steps for those different types of gifts, I might have to make some choices in terms of, hey, which one wins, which one trumps the other to some degree. But once they're enrolled in that step, then they're going to get that stream of communication. And one of the things you can do too, especially if you're using types, if you're grouping them together, if someone's really giving to disparate areas, is you can have some dedicated steps in that workflow for particular project type, particular project group. And then you may have a catch-all one for those that give across multiple types or across multiple groups, because it might be impossible to address everything about all those projects, but now you're going to talk to them at a very broad level about the different types of work that you're doing, right? But either way, you can leverage the tools built into workflows and the way that workflows enroll people in steps to make sure that you're having one conversation with them, right? I don't want to have multiple conversations with that donor at the same time. That creates a lot of havoc. It also then sends them a lot of communication. They might start to say, wow, this is too much and not what I signed up for. I want to have a single conversation with them. Okay. So then I can make the choice to be able to do that as I structure my workflow.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Scott. And thank you to all of you for taking the time out of your day and joining us. I hope you learned something about how to build these multi-channel workflows in Virtuous, and that your organization can start leveraging some of these strategies and tactics moving into the future. We're a couple of minutes over, so I appreciate everyone sticking around and hanging on to the end and participating here in the question and answer. If you would like to learn more about adding letters on demand or SMS to your account, like Scott mentioned, you can reach out to your account manager and they can help you with that. If you don't know who your account manager is, just reach out to support right there in Virtuous, or you can send an email to support@virtuous.org and they'll get you hooked up with a right account manager. Again, thank you to all of you for joining us today, and we hope you have a great rest of the week. Bye-bye.